Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I want to show you 3 tips for mixing metal kick drums. We're going to be looking at a kick drum in a metal mix today, but before we dive in, if you are ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process as a whole and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist. It's a simple PDF that will walk you through the entire mixing process step by step to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without the hassle and without any more guesswork. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and take a look at this kick drum. Kicking things off, let me play you what the drums sound like as a kit inside the finished mix here. This is an instrumental heavy mix. And then we'll solo up the kick drum, and you can hear what the kick drum sounds like by itself as well as inside the entire drum kit. So here's what our mix is sounding like. That's what our finished kick drum is sounding like. Let me take everything off here. You can hear our raw kick drum, and then we're going to go through our 3 tips. This is what our raw kick drum sounds like. No processing. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to use an EQ. So tip number 1 is to pull in an EQ and get rid of any frequencies that you don't need or that are messing up your kick drum tone. So we got 4 moves here that we're going to be making. If we turn on our EQ, first one here is a high pass filter. So just tightening up our low end a little bit. We've got our high pass pulled up to 30 hertz here, 12 dB per octave. I'll A/B that for you. Take a listen to how our low end is changing there. Not too drastic of a change, just focusing up our low end a little bit so it's more in the area of the fundamental and we're not going so far down into the sub area. We're going to bring the low end up as a whole later on. We want it to be focused before we push into our compressor. Next couple moves here, we have a big dip here at 398 hertz, pulling out 6 dB. Let me A/B that for you, and I'll boost that up so you can hear what frequency range we are affecting. Just scooping some of the mid-range out there, some of the kind of low-mid area there at 400. Just making sure it's not too heavy in that area. You don't want your kick drum to be muddy, otherwise it's messy, especially if it's really fast like this. You want it to be tight. You could hear when I boost it up, it gets a little bit too heavy sounding in that area, but you don't want to go too far either. If you get too scoop sounding, it can start to sound hollow very fast. Next 2 cuts we have here are just a couple shapes here in the mids and the high mid area to make sure it's not too slappy sounding. So we've got one at 1.4K and one at 3.1K. And these are tighter Q here. You can see our yellow one's at about 2 on the Q, and then our green one's at about 3 on the Q. So I'll A/B both of these for you, and I'll boost them up. You can hear the ranges we're pulling out. just softening up those two areas so it's not so slappy sounding in the mid-range. That's not a great sound, and that will get very exaggerated if you push those two frequencies into a compressor. You'll get so much more of that. It's not a great tone, especially moving that fast. Moving on, tip number 2 is to push into your compressor. So once you get rid of the frequencies you don't need, then pull in your compressor. So we're going to do quite a bit of compression here, about 7 to 10 dB compression on our kick drum. It's going to keep it tight, it's going to give it some attack, it's going to emphasize the attack we have, and keep our drum tight and fast here. I like using a VCA compressor. This Neve 33609 emulation from PreSonus is really, really nice. So I have recovery, or the release, as fast as possible here. Ratio is 3 to 1, so not too aggressive, not too gentle. And then threshold and gain are each set at 8, so -8 on the threshold, 8 on the gain. So anywhere between 7 and 10 dB compression. It's going to make our drum nice and tight here. So we'll turn it off and I'll kick it in. You can hear how it changes our drum. Hear how tight our drum gets, but you can hear how much it emphasizes the attack element of the drum as well. That's why you want to get rid of the frequencies that you don't need, any nasty frequencies, before you put your compressor in. If you're going to do this heavy amount of compression, you want to make sure you get rid of what you don't need first. Otherwise, that kind of slappy attack in the mid-range will be emphasized by this compressor, and then you'll end up with something nasty sounding. The compression won't work if you don't have your EQ set right. So again, fastest release, middle of the road ratio, and then just doing about 7 to 10 dB compression there. Tightens up our kick drum, and we emphasize that nice attack now that we've gotten rid of what we don't need with our EQ. We lose a little bit of low end, but that's our tip number 3. So after you've gotten rid of what you don't need, after you've emphasized your attack and tightened your kick drum with your compressor, then we add our low end. I like using a tape machine to add some low end. If you don't want to use a tape machine, that's perfectly fine. You can always use EQ too. In this instance, I opt to use a little bit of both. So I like using this soft tube tape machine on the B type because it does help beef things up quite a bit. Maybe that's what B is for. B is for beefy. We're on the 50 nips tape speed, just a little below 5 here, 4.9 on the amount. So not pushing too hard into it, just enough that we get some of that low end from it, some of that beef. It's also going to make sure our top end's not too crazy either. And then we're adding just a half dB at 80 here. You can see we're not too wide on the Q either, about 1.5. So we'll put the tape machine in first. You can see where we're sitting on the VU meter. And then I'll throw the EQ in as well. We'll start with this bypassed. So this is an important part of the kick drum sound, especially when mixing metal music. It gives the drum some realism. Especially if you're working with programmed drums, try throwing in a tape machine like this on your kick drum. Use it to add a little bit of weight, but also to balance and round out your kick drum tone. It gives it some depth as well from adding or imparting its analog vibe or its tape vibe, and that gives the drum some realism so it's not so digital or so fake sounding, especially when you're trying to get that top end attack. If it sounds too digital and too flat sounding, that attack can be weird feeling on the top. Tape machine really helps with that, and again, it's given us that low end weight back. So this is an overall balancing act that we get from the tape machine. Final little touch here, still part 3 here, is the EQ we have afterwards. So I just wanted a little bit more low end, but I didn't want to push any harder into the tape machine. I like sitting between -10 and or 710 here on the VU meter. So just wanted to touch more low end, so I just pulled up regular EQ, half a dB at 80 hertz here. Final piece, take a listen. Gives it just the punch it needs in the low end to be and sit where it needs to in the mix with the rest of the drums. I'll do one more A-B on everything, so I'll turn everything off, turn everything back on. You can hear before and after. Then we'll throw it back into the mix as whole, and I'll do one more A-B on everything. So here's with, and then I'll take it off. You can hear where we started. Quick recap here. Tip number 1 is to pull in an EQ and get rid of any frequencies that you don't need. So find those nasty frequencies, those slappy frequencies, any kind of low mid mud that you don't need, and get rid of that. You can also pull in, your high pass, tighten up your low end a little bit. Tip number 2, pull in your compressor, use it to tighten up your kick drum and emphasize the attack a little bit. Make sure you get rid of the frequencies first that you don't need, then put your compressor in, get your attack, and get it tight. Final tip number 3 is to get your low end where you want it. So again, I love using a tape machine or some kind of analog vibe, analog saturation to get the low end. It really helps, especially on faster drums like this, to help them not sound not so digital and not so flat and attacky sounding. But again, EQ works great as well. I used a combination of both, so tape machine and then the Pro EQ here to get a little bit more low end at 80 hertz and get that punch and that weight that I wanted. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level and really start dialing in your workflows in Engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.